Hey everyone, welcome back to our fertility series. I'm Dr. Kaylee McIsaac from AccuBalance Wellness Center. So why do these chemicals have such a strong influence on our fertility? Is it just affecting our hormones? Is it just affecting our cells? And when we look at the totality of the research that's been done so far, we can see that toxins act via a number of different mechanisms to impact your fertility. There are four basic ways in which toxins influence your reproductive health. The first one is by endocrine disruption. Endocrine is basically a fancy science word that means hormones. So endocrine disruption refers to hormonal imbalances caused by environmental toxins. We're going to talk about this on the next slide. We're going to talk about how toxins influence hormone levels in our system, but that is one of the main mechanisms behind why we believe, or why we've seen in the research, these toxins can influence our fertility. Secondly, some toxins can cause direct damage to the female reproductive system. So that means direct damage to the quality of the egg cells, direct damage to the lining of the uterus, for example. The third way is we see some damage the male reproductive system, very specifically. So we may see a change in sperm count, sperm motility, or sperm morphology with higher systemic levels of some of these chemicals. And then lastly, there are some toxins that have been shown to impair fetal viability or affect the health of the baby. So this damage not only decreases your natural fertility, but it also definitely makes IVF much less likely to succeed. So in the literature, a lot of the research has been done in patients who are pursuing IVF. So they're taking a look at toxic burden and toxic load for women going into an IVF cycle, and then sort of stratifying out what were the results of that IVF cycle and how much of those results may be related to total body burden of toxins. So I want to show you that first. I want to talk about endocrine disruption, what's happening with these hormonal systems. And then I'm going to show you a couple of slides where I've just noted a handful of research from the literature that is showing these links and the effects of these chemicals on the hormonal system, the female and male reproductive systems, and fetal viability as well. So endocrine disruption, hormone imbalances. We know we manufacture a lot of different hormones, men and women. We have these endocrine systems that are very complex, and all of the hormones in our system sort of talk to one another. We consider it like a web relationship, whereby the hormones that come from your pancreas, for example, like the insulin that you release, and the hormones that come from your ovaries, like estrogen and progesterone, and the hormones that come from your adrenal system, like your cortisol, they are all constantly talking to one another, and they all influence one another. Another way that I describe this to patients is it's like the hormonal systems are like three legs on a stool. So let's say we're talking about the ovaries, the adrenals, and the thyroid. Three legs on a stool means that if one of those hormonal systems is out of balance, it can pull the whole thing out of balance. It's like having a wobbly leg, one leg in your stool. So any influence on the hormonal system that a toxin has influences not just that hormone directly, but it will also have far-reaching effects on the rest of the hormonal system. There are a couple of different ways that we see toxins interacting directly with the endocrine system. But the major disruption that we see is that when there are high levels of environmental toxicants in the system, it has a really strong influence on blood sugar regulation and blood sugar control. If you and I have never worked together, you might not know this, but my patients will say that one of the most important things that I'm always trying to address with them is stabilizing their blood sugar. Stable blood sugar leads to a much more stable endocrine or hormone environment in the system. So one of the important things that we often talk about is what can you be doing to stabilize your blood sugar in order to help balance your hormones? These toxins interrupt with that blood sugar control. Overall, we see high toxicant exposure linked to metabolic syndrome, diabetes, abdominal obesity, and then PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, of which there's an element of blood sugar dysregulation in most, if not all, cases of PCOS. For men, when environmental toxins cause type 2 diabetes, 33% of men with that type 2 diabetes will suffer from hypogonadism. Hypogonadism is low testosterone or lack of testicular function. And so, of course, we can see how that may influence his fertility. In women, when environmental toxins contribute to PCOS, which is the most common female reproductive pathology, we see a reduced likelihood of conception. So fecundity is just the likelihood that a woman falls pregnant. And then in pregnancy, we see elevated risks of complications, including gestational diabetes, hypertension, preeclampsia, and even preterm birth. So the higher our levels of toxins are, the higher the level of disruption is in the blood sugar control systems. And then we can see these negative health outcomes during pregnancy because of that. The other way that these toxicants can interact with our endocrine system is by having direct hormonal effects. So one of probably the best studied environmental toxin in this regard is BPA, bisphenol A, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. BPA is found in plastics. It's used, I believe it's used as a plastic stabilizer. So it allows companies to create plastics that are harder and maintain clarity. So it's used sort of ubiquitously all over the place. I always think of water bottles as being the classic example because they've got that sort of hard nature to them, but they're also completely see-through and completely clear. There's some really interesting research that's been done on BPA showing that it has direct hormonal effects, meaning it binds directly to some of the hormone receptors in the body and then can exert a hormonal influence. So BPA has been shown to be weakly estrogenic, meaning it binds to estrogen receptors and exerts a weak estrogen activity when it does so. It's shown to be anti-androgenic, meaning that it binds to androgen receptors like testosterone or DHEA receptors and blocks activity at the level of that receptor. And in a similar fashion, it's been shown to have anti-thyroid activity. So combined to some of our thyroid hormone receptors and block thyroid hormone activity at that site. So that's really interesting. There has also been a small number of human studies concerning the association between BPA exposure and pituitary outcomes. Pituitary is a level of hormonal processing in the brain. So remember, your brain always calls on the ovarian system or on the thyroid system or on the adrenal system in order to manufacture hormones. There was one study that showed a positive association between urine BPA levels being negatively associated with FSH levels when women are exposed to BPA in their workplace. So it can or may also influence the activity of our brain hormones in our systems as well. So whether these toxins are interacting with the blood sugar control or directly with the hormonal receptors, that is all going to produce a cascade of effects in the hormonal system in general, which may negatively influence fertility for many of us.